Hi, guys. All right, let me get myself situated. I'm Andrea. I've been at New Life for 4 years, I think. I'm the children's director. I'm almost always right next door. I'm super excited to be here today because for the longest time, I have been in all of our staff meetings and everything, I'm always like, we need to have more women leadership and more women teaching. And Sam and Adam are always like, yes, what about you? And I'm like, oh, I'm so busy, and I've got 4 kids, and I'm always next door. I don't think it's gonna work out. So then finally, when Sam got his new job and he was leaving, he asked me again to do it. And how could I say no? I couldn't say no. So of course I said yes, and I think one of my big holdups was just like probably what every person who's gonna speak to their peers thinks. And I was like, what do I have to tell you guys about faith and politics? I know nothing about faith and politics. And then I guess like in that was where I got my answer, because I don't know anything about faith and politics and I have a lot of questions. So I thought, maybe I'll just explore some of my own questions that I've been having, and then maybe if I share what I find, then that will be something that maybe you guys were thinking about too. So I asked myself some of the big questions that have been floating around in my mind when I think about this like super messy and polarizing subject of faith and politics sort of mixing together. Like Adam said last week, like that's exactly what everyone tells you not to talk about in mixed company. Do not talk about your faith and do not talk about politics. And so here we are, mixing them together, but why? What's the point? But we can't really ignore the news and what's happening in the political world because it's around us all the time. I mean, it's in our news feeds, and it's on the news, on the like 10 channels of news that we have, and on the radio, and on NPR, and on Facebook, and on Twitter, and on Instagram. It's everywhere, right? You can't avoid politics, and you can't avoid everybody's opinions about politics. And you certainly can't avoid the arguments about politics. And I knew that as Christians in my heart that we were supposed to be engaged, but I didn't exactly know why. So that's just where I started. Why should I, as a Christian, be engaged in the political world? And if any of you have studied the Bible or the Gospels or anything that Paul wrote, you'll know that Christ instilled in his followers the value of the other, right? The neighbor. And actually, last week in Kids Church, we were talking about that. We were talking about who's our neighbor. So we studied the passage that we'll look at together, Romans 13:8. It is, owe no one anything except to love one another. For the one who loves another has fulfilled the law. The commandments: you shall not commit adultery, you shall not murder, you shall not steal, you shall not covet, and any other commandment are all summed up in this word: love your neighbor as yourself. Love does no wrong to a neighbor, therefore love is the fulfilling of the law. So Paul is like, you guys, we can get this right if you focus on this one thing: love. And when I asked the kids who their neighbor is, all of them immediately went, everyone. Which means that you parents are doing an excellent job of teaching your kids of who is their neighbor. They knew. So we're to love everyone in a way which we want to be loved. We should do unto others as we would have them do unto us, right? And I found this cartoon, this very, very simple cartoon that has stuck in my mind. We'll see it on the screen. So he's seeing himself in a reflection of the homeless person. And that's so simple, right? But I needed to practice that. Whoever I am in a position to minister to is as valuable as I am. And if it were me in that position, what would I need? What would I need to hear? What would I need to have? So we are to love unconditionally our neighbors, which fulfills the law of the Lord. All those commandments, all that stuff, it can get complicated, and he boils it down to this one thing: loving. So it's a pretty simple conclusion, right? Easy to understand, easy to draw from that, hard to actually do. And then I was reading in Philippians 2:3-5, which we'll put up there. Do nothing from selfish ambition or conceit, but in humility regard others as better than yourselves. Look, each of you, to not your own interests, but to the interests of others. let the same mind be in you that was in Christ Jesus. So it sounds like to me that he raised the bar, right? That's a step up from love other people as you love yourself. Then he said, love other people better than you would like to be treated, better than if it were you. Because honestly, we're not that great at loving ourselves sometimes, are we? But we are usually pretty good at loving people that we really admire or that are in our families or that we really, really value. So maybe we should treat other people around us, our neighbors, as if they are better than us, like our family or our best friends. Maybe we should treat them like they were Jesus. Because 2 weeks ago in kids' church, you guys have the best kids ever, we were talking about Romans 12, the chapter before that, and the concept of treating everyone in the way that we would treat Jesus. And so I wanted them to think about celebrities, right? People that we revere. And so I asked the group, who's the most famous person you know? And most of the kids were silent, except for Olive. And she screamed out, Justin Bieber! No, Taylor Swift! And she just came up with this whole plan of how she and Taylor Swift were going to become best friends and how they were going to have this amazing day together and how she would clean up her room for Taylor Swift and make her a really great snack. And so I really wanted that. And other kids said like actors or some basketball players, or they all had funny little ideas of who was famous. And I just wanted them to come up with, what would you do? How would you treat this famous person that you think is special? And then I asked them, how would you treat Jesus? What would you do if Jesus were with you all day? And they all said sort of the same thing. They would want to make a special meal and invite their friends over, except for Keegan. He said, I would want to read my Bible with him all day. And I was like, all day you would just sit and read your Bible? And he was like, very serious. He was like, yes. It's like, you're a very pious young man. But the point was, I was trying to get them to imagine how they would treat Jesus and get them to apply that to how they treat others. Maybe see some of the disparities between the day they plan for Jesus and how they treat maybe some people in their class they don't like, or people around them that they don't know really how to engage with. And that was such a powerful lesson for me, because man, if Jesus were at my door, I would roll the red carpet. I would feel so comfortable. I would treat him in such a different way than that homeless person that I always see at the corner getting onto 540, who I just like try not to make eye contact with. What a disparity of how I would treat people. So we need to treat people better than we would treat ourselves, and that is a high calling. Here's the thing. So we have, right, these neighbors and the other that we know that Jesus has taught his followers are very, very valuable. But they're not just people around us that we can wave and say hello with. A lot of times they're suffering. In our world, it is absolutely chock full of like daily suffering, tension, pain, and brokenness. And I'm going to guess that there's probably a child in each of your neighborhoods that goes to bed hungry occasionally, because we know that 1 in 5 kids occasionally deals with hunger. That's how prevalent just like daily suffering is in our country. It is all over the place. And you might be thinking, well, probably not in my neighborhood. You have no idea, right? Families have all kinds of struggles, and they can look great from the outside, but there can be some deep brokenness down in there. But how do we know unless we get to know our neighbors? Whether we want to acknowledge it or not, there are systems in this country that are in place which oppress vulnerable people and keep them down, keep them locked in cycles of poverty and in cycles of fear and in broken homes. And that is why politics can't be ignored by Christians. There's no separation of church and of state for us, because the state is people, and our job is to care for people. And it's important. We can't just pretend like that's not our sphere, because it is. A lot of the laws that are passed and are changed become policy. And policy typically affects people that are vulnerable, right? So I'm talking about people with fewer rights. Who can think of a people group, I want you to raise your hand and tell me, who in America has fewer rights than the rest of us? Yeah. I want you to say it. Yes, LGBT people. What about someone else? Immigrants, yes. Anybody else?
People from Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands.
Yes, that's true. It is true. They don't have as many rights as we do. What about prisoners, right? Prisoners don't have as many rights as we do. People who don't have property, so they're living sort of at the whims of someone else. They are often affected by policy. People who don't have high-paying jobs or diverse education, so people who are trade workers, maybe they live in a town that maybe is all steel mills, and policy might affect that particular mill, and it affects all the people around there because that's what they've been trained to do, and that is their only job. People who are dependent on the government, so welfare recipients, people who get unemployment, people who are on Medicare or Medicaid or disability, these are vulnerable people. They can't just like pack up and move to another city with better jobs or move to another country or like go stay with their family because they don't all have these big safety nets, right? We are their safety net. And so we have to pay attention to what legislation is affecting our neighbors. When we serve the vulnerable in our community, who are we really serving? So I'm now going to read a passage of scripture from Matthew 25, and it is super familiar, and I'm sure you've all heard it many times, but to me, it was just so convicting and beautiful and encouraging, and so I wanted to share it with you. When the Son of Man comes in his glory and all the angels with him, he will sit on his glorious throne. All the nations will be gathered before him, and he will separate the people one from another, as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. And he will put the sheep on his right and the goats on his left. This is unfair to goats because I really like goats. Then the king will say to those on his right, "Come, you who are blessed by my Father, take your inheritance, the kingdom prepared for you since the creation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me in. I needed clothes, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you looked after me. I was in prison, and you came to visit me." And the righteous will answer him, "Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you something to drink? When did we see you a stranger and invite you in, or needing clothes and clothe you? When did we see you sick or in prison and go to visit you?" And the king will reply, "Truly I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me." Then he will say to those on his left, "Depart from me, you who are cursed, into the eternal fire prepared for the devil and his angels." Those are some strong words, you guys. "For I was hungry, and you gave me nothing to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me nothing to drink. I was a stranger, and you did not invite me in. I needed clothes, and you did not clothe me. I was sick, and I was in prison, and you did not look after me." And they will answer, "Lord, when did we see you hungry or thirsty or a stranger or needing clothes or sick or in prison and did not help you?" And he will reply, "Truly I tell you, whatever you did not do for one of the least of these, you did not do for me." And then they will go away to eternal punishment, but the righteous to eternal life. Honestly, it could be like mic drop. We could just like sit here in silence and pay attention to what we just heard because those are some serious words. But right now, I want all my volunteers to come up. I have a bunch of volunteers. And I want you to come up and can we use this microphone right here? And we are going to read some stories of people in our communities that are actually vulnerable people. So if you have a number 1 on your page. So Jamila, I think I gave somebody else your thing, but thank you. So come up to the microphone.
I was a year and a half old when I came to the U.S. in 1994. Growing up, I always thought I was an American. My parents always told me, before you go to bed, pray to God that we get a green card. But I didn't know what that meant. Then I remember walking into my house one beautiful day after school and seeing the look on my parents' faces. They looked dejected. They said, "Our case is denied. Look what came in the mail." Even then, I didn't really get it until my parents had to give up their jobs. My mother could no longer be a professor at Northern Virginia Community College and work on her PhD in computer science. She had to quit her job, stay home and volunteer. My dad could no longer be a server at the Hilton Crown Plaza in D.C. He had no choice but to work under the table in order for us to survive. I even remember one time that my dad asked my little brother if he could borrow money from his piggy bank. It was really hard for all of us. Unfortunately, things did not get any easier. In 2008, my father was stopped by the police on his way home from work because he had a blown taillight. After running his information through the system, they learned that he was undocumented. Though my father came home that night, a week later he was torn from us. August 9th, 2008 was the last time I saw my father. ICE officers raided my family's home in Maryland and took my father to a detention center. He was deported back to Bangladesh that year. With the help of an attorney, my mother was allowed to stay another year. However, she was required to wear a tracking device around her ankle as a condition of being allowed to remain in the U.S. It was so upsetting to see my mother being treated like an animal with this device attached to her. When my mother was deported back to India in 2009, I felt a true sense of loss, knowing both my parents were gone. My brother and I could not even be comforted knowing that our parents were together because they were not. My family had been torn apart across 3 separate countries, with my mother in India, my father in Bangladesh, and me and my brother in the U.S. Rishi Singh, DACA recipient. I was a stranger, and you invited me in.
I was enrolled at Gulliford Technical College. I was living with my family. I was living in my family home with my parents, taking care of them. My father got really bad. He started having seizures, which they thought were strokes. Well, things started to go south at that point, and I was in my second semester, this semester for the spring, and then in February, he was hospitalized, had 3 seizures back to back. When he was hospitalized, my brother-in-law, who has bullied me all my life since I was a kid, came and put me out of my family home. And the next day, he put my 18-year-old son out, who would be graduating high school in May. So, I've been homeless since the end of February. My son went to live with his father, which he really doesn't know because he hasn't really seen him since the 4th grade. So now, my son's with his father, and I'm here. I lost my whole family, my everything. I tried everything before I came to this shelter, and now I've got 3 months. I've got 3 months to find a job and get out, or I won't have anywhere else to go for like a year, from what I understand. But I have nothing. And I'm finding I'm not able, With the education I have, I'm not able to find a job, There's no jobs anymore. I'm just not, this is not how I imagined this to be. I did not think I'd be, I just turned 40 back in December, and I just did not think this is how it would be. Christine, 40, unemployed and living in a shelter. I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat.
My name is Ronald Davis. I've been homeless here for about 1.5 years now, and life is, it's rough. I've slept under bridges, in cardboard boxes. The wintertime is the worst. I go to fill out applications, and I'm not looking presentable, and they say, "We'll call you, just leave your number." But how can I leave a number when I don't have a phone? It's really humiliating to be shaking a cup 24 hours a day, and people just look at you like you're a bum. I mean, I've had people walk past me and say, "Get a job, bum," and I say, "Wait a minute, I'm not a bum. I'm a human being." And people at the end of the day, they're getting on the metro train and they're going home, and I feel so bad that I can't be going home. You can tell by looking at a person if they give you respect or not. A lot of people look at you like you're just a crumb. No matter what anyone thinks of me, though, I have to know that I'm a human first. And just because I'm down on my luck doesn't give anyone the excuse to call me a bum, because I'm not. Ronald Davis, living on the streets. I was thirsty and you gave me something to drink.
I'm Martha, and I'm 87 years old, and I'm living alone. Now, I haven't gotten anyone to go out with or talk to or walk slowly with. See, I hadn't got a friend, really. You know, sometimes people, they don't slow down with you. You see, I got my sense. I'm just not mobile. And I don't go to church anymore because I just can't get there. And I do miss it. Oh, I miss it. Something awful. And I used to go to church. Oh, I really liked it. And I used to have friends when I was mobile, but I just haven't been able to get out, and people just don't stop by anymore. And some days I don't talk to a living soul, not a single one. I used to go to stores just to be around people. You know, you might talk to a person. You probably won't, though. Most people are so busy. I just want to be near a person. I want to touch a person. But I can't get around much anymore. And I'm just not well enough. I have no one. Now, I'm Martha. I'm 87 years old and I live alone. But I was sick and you looked after me.
Robert Riley was a follower of the Grateful Dead who sometimes sold drugs to fellow deadheads in the 70s and 80s. Convicted several times for possession of small amounts of marijuana and amphetamines, he spent short periods in county jails in California and Wisconsin. In 1993, he was convicted in a federal court in Iowa of conspiring to distribute hits of LSD dissolved on pieces of blotter paper. The weight of the LSD was minuscule, but prosecutors also counted the blotter paper's weight, putting it over a 10-gram threshold that with previous convictions meant a mandatory life sentence without parole. "It's an unfair sentence," Judge Longstaff said as he imposed it. 9 years later, in 2002, the judge wrote a letter supporting a petition for presidential clemency. There was no evidence presented in Mr. Riley's case to indicate that he was a violent offender or would be in the future, the judge wrote. "It gives me no satisfaction that such a gentle person as Mr. Riley will remain in prison the rest of his life." In January 2017, President Obama granted clemency to Robert, and he is now out of prison. However, he lives with a debilitating illness, is trying to find work as an ex-con, and has no home or savings. He was in prison for almost 25 years. I was in prison, and you came and visited me.
There were so many stories of people in vulnerable situations. But the thing that I kept seeing over and over again was that they had no one around them. They were alone. They were isolated, sometimes sort of on their own because they didn't want to bother anybody, but sometimes just because their community wasn't asking, "Is there something we can do for you? What's going on in your life?" Y'all, Matthew 25, what I just read, the sheep and the goats, that is for real. That is not hypothetical. That is an action plan. Those are actual examples of what we can do to bless vulnerable people and to love them like Jesus. I mean, simple stuff: food, water, community or housing, clothing, medicine, visiting people. He said, "I was a prisoner and you visited me." He didn't say you busted me out of jail. Just you came and said hello, right? I mean, also I think we could apply that to people who are shut-ins or people who are just alone. But are we doing these things? Am I doing these things? Are you doing these things? We need to give and to love without justification, without making people jump through hoops to prove that they need it. We need to follow the Spirit and give and love to our neighbors, to our homeless friends, to people who are doing this work if we cannot do this work. And if policy or laws come up that would take some of these things away from these already vulnerable people, we have a duty to fight it. On a personal level, one-on-one, and on a political level. The government is not the church, but it can be a tool that Christians can use to fight injustice, because if the church was doing its job of serving the vulnerable, the government would not have to step in to ensure the most basic of human needs gets met. So we know why we need to engage with the world. And that engagement should include an awareness of the political climate, because we're not supposed to live in this special little Christian whitewashed contemporary bubble, right? He wants us to get involved, and it can be scary and it can be intimidating, and there can be a lot of fear and uncertainty when we step out to serve others. But where do you think that comes from? Because that is not of God. How can you love your neighbor if you aren't looking them in the eyes, if they are suffering and you have no idea because you never got close enough to ask? Caring for others is foundational in the story of the gospel. And as Christians, it's our job to be, and this is like such a cliche word, but Jesus' hands and feet, right? That's our job. And I don't want to discourage you, because Christians have been doing this for a really long time. Like for centuries. And the thing is that we don't always know about it. And so some of us can get like stuck in this thought pattern that the loudest, most hateful people who call themselves Christians are actually representative of the American church, which I don't think is true. Remember, last week Adam was talking about unity among Christians, and that's one thing that we are supposed to have that we can offer to the broken world. So we have to remember that just because they're the loudest doesn't mean they're actually what the church is and what the church is doing. Because Christians are at the ground level serving and giving and loving. And did you know that in Texas, 80% of relief efforts have been from faith organizations? 80% from churches, from homeless shelters that are all faith-based. And most of them are Christian. 80% of all of the people who are being helped in Texas are being helped by Christians who are not getting paid to do it. This is just what they do because they have the love of Jesus in their heart, and they are spreading his hope and his love and reconciliation all over that state. And right here in Raleigh, every single day, hundreds of people are encouraged and fed and mentored and visited and cared for by a lot of organizations, some of which you guys have volunteered with. Urban Ministries, Raleigh Rescue Mission, Love Wins, Jobs for Life, Habitat for Humanity, Prison Aftercare, Reality Ministries with Love from Jesus. These are all faith-based organizations that people started when they let Jesus change the way they viewed the world and started seeing their neighbor as equally valuable as themselves. And I know that there are definitely people in this room who are doing this work. We might not all know about it, but Jesus knows about it, and he's working through you, and he's working through other people in the city to minister to the lost and the broken. And I just needed that little push to remind me and to examine my own fears and my own prejudices and to really step out and start living like Jesus and to let the same mind be in me that was in Christ Jesus. So, quick review. Number 1, love our neighbors as ourselves. Number 2, when we minister to the vulnerable, we minister to Jesus. And number 3, the vulnerable are all around us, often trapped in systems of oppression and control. So, now what? Now what do? We got to start somewhere, right? So we have to get involved. We have to step outside of our comfort zones. And I think there's 3 different categories that I thought engagement sort of can be divided into. So number 1 is personal, right? You are personally like helping a family. And the person who has modeled this the most for me was Sam, because he was always bringing like these random people to our events that he had met in his neighborhood, that he had become friends with, and they didn't speak any English, and he would bring them to our stuff, and we would feed them and love on them. And so that was personal engagement, right? You and another person. Sometimes you might be the only example of a true Christian that someone ever gets to know. And your servanthood is your evangelism, right? You don't have to like read the Romans Road with them. Just love on people. The second way we can reach out is supportive. So we're not always in a position to be able to go out and to do this one-on-one kind of thing, but there are people who are doing it, like all those organizations that I listed. You can give your money, you can give your time, you can call them and say, do you guys have any specific prayer needs that I can be praying with? Or get a group of people together and really intercede for some of these groups, because they are doing some hard, important work. So we can support missionaries. We can do so many things to help support people who are doing the important work. The third type of engagement is political. I include this because we live in a country with 50 different states, and every single state has different rules. And sometimes we can even negate the rules that are happening at the government level, at the higher government level. It's just really important that we know what's going on with these laws. We know about DACA. We know about welfare. We know about all of these things that are affecting our vulnerable neighbors, and we can't know about it sometimes unless we just get on the computer and learn about it. One of those things might just be researching who is on my city council, who is the mayor. I didn't even know who the mayor of Raleigh was until yesterday. And this is her third term. I didn't know her name. I thought maybe it was a woman, but I wasn't sure. That's how out of touch we can be with this kind of stuff. I don't think I'm alone in that. So one of the things we can do politically is just start from the ground level and figure out who even in my state and in my county is helping to make and pass these rules and these laws. Because then when we find out who's coming up for election, we can go out and vote for the person who best reflects the attitude of Jesus Christ. That is so important. But how many people really do it, right? I mean, I don't know if I do it at that level, at that minor government level. But those people are important. So I also know that you guys are a lot smarter than me, and many of you are already doing this. So we're going to brainstorm. So we're going to get into 3 groups. So just sort of look around and huddle up together in 3 different groups. Like my image, brainstorm, get it? So we're going to come up with ideas, and I just made a simple little sheet with 3 columns: personal, supportive, and political. I already gave you a couple. Have one person be a note taker. I have some pens and a marker. And you're going to have 7 minutes to come up with more ideas of how you, in particular, can get engaged on these 3 different levels. And then we're going to come back together and very quickly go over what you guys came up with, right? I want to see you stand up and get in 3 groups right now. You can move the chairs if you have to. That's perfectly fine. Go quick.
All right.
Oh, you did not have a home. There were places you visited frequently. You took off your shoes and scratched your feet, 'cause you knew that the whole world belonged to the meek. But you did not have a home. No, you did not have a home. And you did not take a wife. There were pretty maids all in a row who lined up to touch the hem of your robe, but you had no place to take them, so you did not take a wife. No, you did not take a wife. Birds have nests, foxes have dens, but the hope of the whole world rests on the shoulders of a homeless man. You have the shoulders of a homeless man. No, you did not have a home. Well, you had no stones to throw. You came without an axe to grind, did not toe the party line. No wonder sight came to the blind. Had no stones to throw. You had no stones to throw. And you rode an ass's foal. You spread the coats and cut down palms for you and your donkey to walk upon. But the world won't find what it thinks it wants on the back of an ass's foal. So I guess you had to get sold, 'cause the world can't stand what it can't own, and it can't own you. hope of a whole world rests on the shoulders of a homeless man. At the shoulders of a homeless man.
I would like for these conversations to maybe continue at some point in the future somehow. So remember where you're at. And yeah, if you're turned to face the wrong way, turn around. And we'll have the person from each group who was the scribe come up and just tell us real briefly in this microphone what your group came up with. This group is having a serious talk. But Jamila, you can go ahead and come up and read your groups. And what I would like for everyone to do is to take mental notes and what sounds like something that you could do this week. Latch onto it, put it in your head. That's your homework. We can all do something very simple this week to start that process of engagement in this issue, right? Okay, here, Jamila.
Okay, so we had a lot on the personal. Chad shared a story of changing someone's tire the other day, so keep your eyes open for those in need all around us. Don't make people have to justify their need. They're on the side of giving. We talked about how Bert gives rides to people and how that's a great example. Start somewhere close to you and get to know the people in your neighborhood and at work, just like start at home basically. Visit people in assisted living facilities because there are those who just aren't around people. And we learned about a prisoner release program. Prisoners who have been on good behavior can be released, but they need a sponsor. And you said your mom does that? She used to do that. And then use your platform, so whether that's social media, talking to friends, use your platform to share your views respectfully with others. Ways you can kind of give to supportive organizations, giving to the Durham Rescue Mission, giving to the Southern Poverty Law Center, and that one kind of bleeds into the political because they do a lot of the money that they're given, they're able to go to court over different legislative things, and so that bleeds into the political, and then get educated and vote.
And on the topic of the assisted living home or the nursing home, you can call and just say, hey, is there anybody that doesn't ever get visitors? And they will like match you with somebody, and so you're not just like awkwardly walking around, and they'll like give you an assignment and they'll say what a good time for you to come and visit somebody is. So it's easy to do things like that. Adam?
All right, so on personal, Martha mentioned that they baked for their neighbor, which I thought was awesome. Also, just personally, I think a lot of times we're so overwhelmed when we see someone at the corner that we don't do anything because we don't think we can fix everything. But just doing something, even having a conversation, giving something if you can, but also, this kind of bleeds into supportive, just being aware of all that. There's so many ministries in Raleigh that even if you just had like some references, I feel like you'd feel a little more comfortable engaging with a homeless person on the corner, because instead of just like, I guess I could buy you something right now, you could also say, and I know this ministry down the street could help you this way. I know this, like we used to have Molly here all the time with Carolina Cares, and she knew pretty much every single service in Raleigh. So she was able to engage with the needy so well because she could go down the line of services that they could avail themselves of. So personally, when you have that moment of conversation on the corner, knowing those things I think would help all of us. Supportive, we talked about donating time and money to organizations that are helping. Bert mentioned that there used to be a Communion Sunday at DPC, and that part of Communion Sunday was in taking food afterward to the food bank. And I thought that was a beautiful illustration of what, in the passage where Paul talks about communion, he gets really mad that people go hungry during communion. So I thought that was a powerful application of that. Politically, they talked about how New Life used to go down and hand out food, but you can't do that anymore because of legislation in Raleigh that you can't hand out food to the homeless. And I forgot about that. And so, yeah, that's an area politically where I definitely think knowing why that is and potentially contending what's going on with that would make a lot of sense, because it would be a lot easier if as churches we could just go down and hand out food, but that's not allowed anymore. So probably contending on that piece of legislation.
How about some civil disobedience?
Yeah, just hand out food and see what happens. I mean, yeah, potentially. But yeah, I don't remember why. I don't know what the reasoning was. There are ministries that are allowed, but I'm not sure all the stuff behind that. Anyway, so that's definitely a political issue that I think is concerning for us. So.
Great, thank you. Callie? Okay. You gonna stay there? Yeah, come up, so we get it on video. I love the idea of, just to back up for what Adam said, of knowing services, because that is really how you're an advocate for people. It's not all just about like bringing groceries to people, although that is sometimes what the need is. A lot of times they just feel so alone and they don't know how to make those connections. They don't have a phone, they don't have a car. And so the best way we can be an advocate is to do that research for them.
So we came up with several things, and some of them are things that Andrea had already talked about. Like for personal, we had, having a daily conversation with someone, but being genuine in that conversation and actually caring, because you can talk to someone and it can just go in one ear and out the other because you're just making small talk and being friendly. But take a genuine interest in somebody and build those friendships, because that's how you start those relationships, to get to know someone. And you may have a witnessing opportunity, you may not, but nothing's going to happen unless they know you actually care about them. So build genuine conversations and friendships, take an active interest, and pay attention to what somebody's saying, and offer your skills. If you can do something and someone needs help, offer that. That's what we had for personal, but the one that really stood out for us, and it's something that I think the church can do right now if we take action on it. Have you guys ever seen there's an idea that I've seen floating around, and Colin brought this up, is making bags to pass out to homeless people that have, necessities, that have lists of resources, that have a free bus pass, that let them know where they can get these things. And it would be a really great thing if the church maybe, we could do that, and we could all have one in our car and we could pass it out. Because you can't just drive by that person on 540 every day and not look at him. You need to do something about it. Whether it's going to Burger King, circling back around, going to Burger King and buying him a meal and giving it to him, or giving him this bag that's got shampoo, body wash, and toothbrushes in it, and doing that for him. I think that's something that we could do, and it really stood out to us.
Absolutely. Those are great ideas. We actually did that. The kids' church did that a couple of years ago. I can't remember what we called them, but we had little bags, and we filled them with things, and it was so good, because kids are way better at ministering to homeless people than we are, because they're not afraid. And so the kids were so excited about that, and we should totally do that. It is so easy. It's like easier than those Christmas boxes, those little shoe boxes. Those are difficult. These are easy, right? Just a couple things in a bag. You have 5 bags in your car every time. You can totally bless somebody with that. So thank you guys for sharing your ideas. I want to encourage you right now that you're a part of a huge group of people who have been and still are quietly caring for the dismissed and vulnerable people in our world, advocating for them, being Jesus to them, and taking them in when no one else would. It is difficult in such an individualistic world, and it's particularly America, to actually see past the confines of our own families and our jobs and our homes and our responsibilities. But Jesus is calling us, this community in this room, into deeper engagement with the marginalized. Let's pray.